Thank you, Allie, and thanks to all of you for being here. We appreciate members of the press and the media here. You can see by the attendance here today that there's a lot of interest in this issue. There's emotion on it, there's concern, and we're here today because we believe that the federal government has failed to keep its promises to the state of Utah. And it's time for us to do something about that that will help us for economic development, and particularly to help us with the education of our children. In 1894, and we have a couple of real scholars here, and Bill Redd and Bill Howell, who've been involved with this issue for many, many years. But in 1894, as part of our Enabling Act, the promise made to Utah was the same promise made to virtually every other state in America. That was those lands which were not privately owned at the time a state would be disposed of. And to dispose mean to sell them, to give them, but to privatize those lands and do so in an expeditious manner. Because that didn't happen. 2/3 of Utah's land mass is controlled and owned by the federal government. And I'm here to tell you it's not just a Utah problem, it's a Western state problem. As you look around and look at a map of the United States of America, you'll find that 90% of our federal lands are in the Western states. In 7 Western states, the federal lands comprise more than 50% of their total land mass, putting us at distinct disadvantage. And we have to, as a state, live by the reality of control by distant Congress, who does not understand all that has to go on in our own backyards here, because they are so distant, and managed by unelected federal administrators who sometimes don't care what the challenges are for the state that these federal lands reside within. Our royalties, our severance taxes, our ability to develop economically, our resource extraction, responsible use of these lands that can be done in an economically sound way are curtailed, often arbitrarily curtailed, to our detriment. And what it means to me as the governor of the state of Utah is that Robert Abbey, the director of the BLM, has more control over the land in Utah than the governor of the state of Utah. The bill I'm signing today, House Bill 148, sponsored by Representative Ken Ivory. Ken Sumption wishes he'd sponsored it. House Bill 148, sponsored by Representative Ken Ivory, establishes a principle-based framework for structured and civil public discourse as we look forward to opportunities to improve the paradigm that we have here with our relationship with the federal government. It has a potential legal challenge, but it's a pathway forward for us to rebalance our relationship with the federal government. I believe the state of Utah must, in fact, restore some kind of semblance and balance so that we're on a similar kind of equal footing with other states in America, particularly those east of the Rocky Mountains. If we don't do so, we'll not have the opportunity nor the ability to have educational parity, which we certainly need here in Utah, and with a fast-growing state like we have with a high birth rate and a large family size, the education of our students has got to be paramount on our minds. Now, we don't have all the answers. There needs to be a lot more discussion and questions that need to be asked. But this bill will, in fact, formalize and legitimize the engagement that we will need to have for our policymakers, particularly those back in Washington, D.C., to move this conversation forward. This bill is the mechanism to put the federal government on notice that we want to have increased dialogue. We've tried in times past with some forms of legislation which have been rebuffed and ignored and seemingly given just a lack of consideration. So this puts the federal government on notice as a way to help leverage and get their attention for enhanced federal dialogue. It's an apparatus to facilitate a paradigm change when it comes to the public land management and the justification for conducting a complete and thorough economic analysis of the financial potential of the lands in question. With that, I'd like to thank Representative Ken Ivory, Senator Wayne Niederhauser, and Representative Roger Barris, the sponsors of a companion bill on House Joint Resolution 3, for leading the charge and understanding the importance of this issue and helping get their colleagues in the legislature on board. I also want to recognize and thank the Attorney General, Mark Shurtleff, who can't be here, but his Chief Deputy, Attorney General John Swallow, and his staff for their counsel and advice as this legislation has made its way through the legislature and to my desk. I'd also like to recognize and acknowledge our congressional delegation. This is really going to put a burden on them to see what they can do in Washington, D.C. to change the dialogue and move the balance for where we are now to where we ought to be in conjunction with other states. But I appreciate Senator Hatch, our senior senator, who's been leading this fight for many, many years, and this is a continuation of that effort. I want to recognize Congressman Rob Bishop, who's been a tireless advocate, and again has taken some arrows and some criticism because of his forthright manner and a leader in highlighting this interrelationship between the public lands and our education. As a former teacher, he probably understands that intersection better than most. He also has some great maps. I think we'll see some of those here today. I also want to recognize Senator Mike Lee for his key role in this process. It's not too long ago that Senator Lee came to see me and said he needed some legislation passed in order to shine a spotlight on the way that Utah has been disadvantaged because of these large amounts of public lands that we have and have not a lot of control over. And he needed this legislation as an issue so that his to show his colleagues back in Washington. And I appreciate his early support, and that's become a catalyst for us to get to this point here today in this legislation. I'd also acknowledge Congressman Chaffetz, who's not here with us today. He has some family issues that he's taking care of today, but he wanted me to convey to all of you that he is highly supportive of this effort. With that, again, we want to hear from our congressional delegation, so we'll first turn the time over to Senator Hatch, then Senator Lee, then Congressman Bishop.